Every trucker has a story that keeps them up at night. But these two are different. One driver saw something at a truck stop no one should ever see, and another heard a voice on Channel 19 that should have been impossible. If you think the highway is empty at night, you're wrong. I've been a long-haul trucker for 14 years, long enough to know that the road has its own kind of ghosts. Not the sheet-wearing, chain-rattling kind, no. The ones I'm talking about creep up on you in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the highway feels like a living thing breathing beneath your wheels. But nothing in all my years prepared me for what happened outside Amarillo, Texas, at a rundown truck stop off I-40, where an old tragedy never really stayed buried. I was running a refrigerated load from Flagstaff to Oklahoma City, a familiar route I'd driven so many times I could do it half asleep, which, honestly, I often did. That week had been harder than usual. My dad passed away 3 months earlier. I kept telling myself I was fine, that keeping busy would help. But grief has a way of slipping into the cab with you, sitting heavy in the passenger seat, no matter how fast you drive. I left Albuquerque late, pushing harder than I should have. And by the time I crossed into the Texas Panhandle, the sky had opened up into one of those cold, slanting rains that look silver in the headlights. The storm forced me to pull off earlier than planned. The only place nearby was an old truck stop called Redford's Fuel and Rest, a place I recognized from a bit of local history. Back in 2014, a chain reaction pileup on I-40 killed 5 people, including a little boy who'd wandered out of a broken-down minivan in the chaos. His picture used to show up on missing posters long after the fact, because his body hadn't been found right away. By the time they identified him, the story had already spun into one of those roadside legends truckers passed around on CB. The kid who never made it home. I never believed in those stories. Not until that night. The parking lot at Redford's was half-lit and slick with rain, reflecting the flickering neon sign like a broken red heartbeat. I found a spot near the far side of the lot, killed the engine, and leaned back to let the ringing in my ears fade. The storm hammered the windshield. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is a faint tapping, soft, hesitant, almost polite. At first, I thought it was the rain, or maybe a loose strap, slapping the trailer. But then it came again. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate. On the driver's side door. I snapped awake, instantly alert. Nobody should be out in that weather, not without a damn good reason. I leaned forward, wiping the fog from the inside of the window with my sleeve. And that's when I saw him. A kid, maybe 8 or 9, standing just below my window, drenched head to toe. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his jacket too thin for the cold. He looked up at me with eyes that were glassy and wide, reflecting the parking lot lights like wet marbles. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just stared. I froze. Something in my gut whispered that nothing about this was right. But then the kid pressed one hand against the door, his fingers splayed, trembling. That was enough to shove aside my unease. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. "Hey kid, are you okay? Where are your parents?" He didn't answer. Rain slid down his cheeks in thin streams, making him look like he'd been crying. "Do you need help?" I asked. He nodded. Just once. Slow, mechanical. "All right," I said gently. "You can come inside the cab where it's warm. We'll get you some help." The kid stepped back, giving me space to climb down. My boots splashed into a shallow puddle. The air smelled like wet asphalt and diesel. He stared up at me as I crouched, trying to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" I asked. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then flinched, looking past me toward the shadowed end of the parking lot. "Is someone with you?" I turned, squinting through the rain. But there was nothing there except the silhouettes of a few parked rigs and the dark field beyond. When I looked back, the kid was gone. Vanished so fast it was like he'd blinked out of existence. I spun around, scanning every direction. "Kid? Hey, where'd you go?" No answer. The truck stop lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. My pulse hammered against my ribs, and a strange, tight sensation wrapped around the back of my neck like the air had turned colder. I climbed back into the cab, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was exhausted, that maybe I'd imagined part of it. But then, as I reached for the ignition, I caught movement in the mirror. The kid was standing behind my trailer, perfectly still, arms at his sides, staring directly up at the cab. My throat went dry. I flicked on the dome light, suddenly needing the comfort of brightness. That's when I heard my CB radio crackle soft at first, then louder, as though someone was trying to dial in. I hadn't touched the CB all night. It shouldn't have been active. Static filled the cab. Then came a faint whisper, a voice so small and broken, I almost didn't catch the words. "Help him." I froze, staring at the radio. The voice came again, clearer this time, threaded with a sadness that seemed to seep into my bones. "Help him." The storm outside intensified. Lightning flared, briefly illuminating the kid's frail silhouette behind the trailer, and then he stepped out of sight. My instincts told me to drive away, to get back on the highway and forget any of this ever happened. But something deeper, something raw and aching pulled at me. Maybe it was the memory of my dad, who always stopped for anyone stranded on the road. Maybe it was the emptiness I'd been carrying since he died. Or maybe it was just that broken voice on the CB, echoing with a pain I recognized all too well. I opened the door again and stepped out into the rain. "Kid!" I called. "If you need help, I'm right here." Silence, then a faint splash. Behind the trailer, my heart pounded. I walked toward the back, each step slow and heavy. The rain blurred everything, turning the world into streaks of gray and red. As I reached the end of the trailer, a sharp metallic sound cut through the storm like something scraping against steel. I swung around the corner. Nothing, just the dark field stretching out beyond the edge of the lot. Then I looked down. Small, muddy footprints led from the pavement to the trailer, to the ladder. The trailer's maintenance ladder. The prints ended halfway up as if the kid had climbed onto the trailer roof. A surge of dread rolled through me. Before I could react, my CB crackled violently loud enough I heard it from outside. Then, a different voice came through. A man's voice this time. Weak, strained, whispering the same words through the static. "Help him!" I stumbled back, startled. Lightning flashed again, illuminating something on the trailer roof. A small silhouette, crouched low, clinging to the edge, watching me. The kid. I opened my mouth to call to him, but the silhouette pulled itself backward, disappearing from sight. And then I heard it. A single thud from the roof of my cab, directly above my head. The thud above the cab froze me in place. For a moment, all I could hear was the rain smacking the metal roof and the dull roar of the storm. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to move. I climbed back into the truck, slammed the door shut, and locked it again. My soaked clothes clung to my skin, making me shiver. But it wasn't the cold that made my hands tremble. It was the knowledge that something was up there. I tilted my head, listening. Another soft scrape. something small shifting its weight. I reached slowly for the ignition but stopped when the CB burst alive again, this time with a sound so distorted it made my teeth ache. A burst of static, then silence. Then breathing. Not mine, not any adult's. Shallow, rapid, a child's. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. The breathing hitched, like the speaker was trying to swallow back a sob. Then, a small whisper, barely audible through the static. "It hurts." My stomach dropped. Lightning lit up the cab for half a second, and in that white flash I saw something reflected in the windshield motion on the roof. A small shadow shifting forward, little fingers curling over the edge as if the kid was preparing to climb down. I lurched back in my seat, unsure what he wanted or how any of this was possible. I glanced at my phone, no signal. The storm must have knocked something out, or maybe this place always had terrible coverage. Either way, I was alone. "Listen," I said, forcing my voice to steady. "If you're hurt, I can help. Just talk to me." The kid didn't answer, but the breathing on the CB continued. Then I realized something. The radio was on the emergency channel 19, the one truckers used for accidents, warnings, or trouble on the road. But no one should have been transmitting from that close, not without me seeing their rig or equipment. I hesitated, then slowly reached up to shut the CB off. Before my hand touched the knob, the voice changed again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a man's voice, rough and broken, speaking through layers of static. "You can't leave him." My chest tightened. "Who is this?" I demanded. The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, the CB hissed violently, like something heavy had fallen onto the transmitter on the other end. Then the man spoke again, and this time, I felt the words deep in my bones. He tried to get help before. Nobody stopped, not in time. The storm outside rumbled low and long, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Something about the man's tone made my skin crawl. Sadness, anger, desperation, all woven into those few words. And before I could ask anything else, something slid down the windshield with a wet smear. I jerked my eyes up. A tiny palm, pressed flat against the glass. It streaked downward slowly, leaving a faint trail of muddy water. The kid was hanging somewhere just above the windshield, clinging to the cab in the middle of the storm. I didn't think. I shoved the door open again and stepped out, the wind nearly ripping the handle from my hand. "Kid!" I yelled over the storm. "Hold on!" I grabbed the side mirror and pulled myself up enough to see the roof. In a flash of lightning, I saw him curled near the edge, gripping the metal with thin fingers, shivering violently. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with fear and something else, relief. "Don't move!" I shouted. "I'm coming up." I didn't know if it was safe. I didn't know if I could even climb it in the rain. But leaving him there wasn't an option. I rounded to the back of the trailer and grabbed the ladder, hauling myself up rung by rung, boots slipping on the metal. Each gust of wind threatened to peel me off like a sticker, sending me crashing to the asphalt. When I reached the top, I crawled across the wet metal toward him. "Hey," I called softly, trying to mask my fear. "I've got you." He didn't answer. He just stared at me with rain-filled eyes, as if trying to recognize me. I reached out, slowly, so I wouldn't scare him. "It's okay," I said. "I won't let you fall." His lips quivered. "Cold," he whispered, voice trembling. "I know," I said. "Let's get you inside." I wrapped my arms around him, or tried to. His jacket felt soaked, but cold in a way that didn't feel like rain. A stillness cold, a years-old cold. As I lifted him, I felt how impossibly weightless he was, like lifting a bundle of wet leaves. We made our way down the ladder. I pulled him into the cab, shut the door, and cranked the heat. His small shoulders hunched as he stared straight ahead, dripping water onto the rubber floor mat. "We're warm now," I said gently. "You're safe." He didn't react. He just whispered a single sentence. Not to me. Not fully. More like he was remembering something. Mom said it would only take a minute. My blood ran cold. A piece of the 2014 accident story came back to me. The mother had gotten out to check a flat tire. The boy had followed her, unnoticed in the chaos and smoke. Before anyone realized he was missing, the pileup had already turned deadly. "Hey," I said carefully, "do you remember what happened to you?" The kid blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused. "The lights," he murmured. "The big lights. They didn't stop." My throat tightened. He was talking about the semi-trucks involved in the crash. Before I could respond, the CB crackled again. The man's voice clearer this time, close enough to sound like he was right behind me. "He's been trying to get home." The kid flinched at the voice, curling into himself. I spun toward the CB. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" Rain battered the cab, the storm slamming against the metal like fists. The man's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to seep through the speakers like fog. Finish what they didn't. I didn't know what that meant until I turned back to the kid and saw him staring at me with eyes full of something I hadn't expected. Hope. "You want me to take you home?" I asked softly. He nodded, one slow, trembling nod. I swallowed hard. Amarillo wasn't far, and maybe this was what the man on the CB meant. Maybe this was why the kid appeared to me and not someone else. Maybe, on some level, I needed to do this as much as he did. I started the engine. The trailer shuddered as the truck came alive. The kid watched me, silent but no longer shaking. I pulled out of the lot and back onto the highway, the storm easing as if guiding us forward. The kid sat upright, eyes fixed on the road ahead, like he recognized the route. We reached a small residential street on the outskirts of Amarillo, one I wouldn't have known if not for the directions the kid pointed out with small motions of his hand. When I stopped in front of a modest one-story house with peeling paint, he looked at me with something like gratitude. Then he opened the passenger door. I tried to grab him instinctively, not wanting him to vanish into the storm, but my hand passed through his jacket like mist. He stepped down from the cab anyway, his feet not quite touching the wet pavement. At the front porch light, which flickered weakly against the rain, a woman stepped out. Middle-aged, tired eyes. She froze when she saw him. Her hand rose to her mouth. The kid turned to me once more, giving the smallest smile. Then he walked toward her, growing more transparent with each step, until he finally faded completely, just as he reached her outstretched arms. She collapsed onto the porch in sobs that tore through the rain. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. She knew. And somehow, so did I. When I drove away, the CB crackled one last time. The man's voice calmer now, softer. "Thank you. I never heard from him again, and I've never stopped at Redford's Fuel and Rest since. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the road stretches empty and the world feels hollow, I think about that boy, how long he must have waited in the rain, hoping someone would stop, hoping someone would help him find his way home. I don't know why it had to be me. But I like to believe that maybe my dad had something to do with it, that he nudged me to pull over that night, reminded me that compassion is sometimes the only thing strong enough to quiet the ghosts we carry. And every time I think that, the cab feels a little less empty. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 2 decades, and in all that time, I've learned one unbreakable rule. If your CB radio crackles to life on an empty highway at 2 a.m., you don't ignore it. Even if it's just static, even if it's just some lonely trucker fighting sleep, because sometimes the CB is the only warning you get before the darkness on the road decides it wants you to. My name's Trevor Hayes, 42, divorced, no kids. I haul refrigerated freight for a company out of Billings, Montana. Every winter, the stretch of US 212 cutting through the Beartooth foothills becomes a white-knuckled nightmare. Snowdrifts taller than my rig, black ice that feels like driving on glass, and the kind of isolated silence that makes you swear the mountains are listening. I'd always taken pride in handling it better than most. But then last year happened, and I still can't talk about it without feeling my pulse spike. I was hauling a load of beef from Missoula to Fargo, running late because a storm had been rolling across Montana faster than predicted. That winter was already brutal, one of the coldest since the infamous 1964 Northern Rocky Mountains cold wave. It was the kind of cold that killed people quickly, the kind farmers still talked about like it had personality, vicious, hungry. I hadn't slept much that week. My brother Colin had passed away 2 months earlier, heart failure, 40, and he was gone. We used to talk on the CB when he drove regional routes. After he died, every time I reached for the mic, I felt like something inside me was missing. Or listening. I was somewhere east of Crow Agency, real reservation land, real history when the snowfall thickened into a wall. The road became a tunnel carved through blowing white. My headlights bounced off the swirling flakes, making everything look alive. 1 minute I could see 20 feet, the next barely 5. It wasn't safe to keep going, but the nearest truck stop was miles behind me, and the last thing I wanted was to jackknife on an icy shoulder. I figured I'd crawl forward until I reached a turnout or a rest area. That's when the CB crackled, sharp, sudden, the kind of pop that makes your ears pull taut. Channel 19 lit up with static that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, a voice, low, strained, barely audible beneath the noise. Don't stop. I froze. I hadn't touched the dial. No one in this weather should have been anywhere near me. Repeat? I said, leaning toward the mic. Did someone call on 1 to 9? The radio hissed. Then the same voice, louder this time, cutting through the static like someone whispering directly into my ear. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop for him. A chill crawled down my spine. Copy that. Who is this? You in trouble? No answer. Just a soft clicking sound, like someone tapping a fingernail against the mic. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. I swallowed hard. In CB codes, that pattern didn't mean anything official, but among truckers, it had a more informal meaning. Someone's watching you. I tried to breathe slow, but my heartbeat thudded in my neck. If you need help, tell me where you are. For a long moment, nothing. Then the voice drifted back, but softer, almost defeated. Too late. I didn't know what to make of it. Without thinking, I eased off the pedal, letting the truck slow to about 25. That's when I saw something through the blizzard. A dark shape on the right shoulder. Not a vehicle, a person. Standing in the snowstorm, one arm raised weakly, like he was trying to flag me down. I gripped the wheel, hard. The voice on the CB echoed in my head. Don't stop for him. The man stumbled closer to the edge of the road, almost collapsing. Even through the blowing white, I could see he wasn't wearing the right clothes for this cold, just jeans and a jacket that looked soaked straight through. His head hung low, face hidden by his hood. I slowed anyway. It was instinct, muscle memory. You don't leave a man to freeze to death in Montana. Not out here. Not in this. I flicked my hazard lights. "You okay?" I called through the cracked window. No answer. He just stood there, shivering violently. Something about the way he moved or didn't move tightened the knot in my gut. "Sir, you injured?" He lifted his head, slowly, and for a moment, I wished the snow had hidden his face better. His skin was pale in a way that looked wrong, like something pulled tight over bone. His eyes were sunken, dark, unfocused. Frost clung to his eyelashes. His lips were blue. "Help!" he croaked. It sounded like the word had to climb out of his throat 1 inch at a time. "Please!" I reached for the door handle, and my CB exploded with static so loud I recoiled. The same voice shouted through the speakers, no longer whispering, commanding. "Trevor, don't." My breath caught in my chest. "Trevor." He said my name. The freezing man outside staggered closer, hand outstretched. "I just need a ride." The radio crackled again, the voice ragged, desperate. "Trevor, he's not alive." I froze. The man outside let out a sound like a broken inhale. Not pain, not fear, more like frustration. His head twitched in a way no human head should turn sharp and quick like a glitching video frame. Then he took one more step toward my truck, and the storm seemed to bend around him. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the accelerator. The tires fishtailed, screaming against the ice, but the rig lurched forward. In the mirror, the man dropped to all fours, scrambling after me with movements that didn't look right. Too fast, too crooked, too cold. My stomach turned. I forced myself not to look again. Not until I'd put half a mile between us. When I finally checked the mirror, the shoulder was empty. No tracks. No body, nothing but the storm. My CB went silent, completely. I drove for what felt like an hour before I found a turnout protected by a rock wall. I parked, killed the engine, and collapsed back in the seat, shaking. I had no explanation, none that made sense, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That voice had saved my life. Or something that sounded like a voice. I didn't sleep. The storm hammered the trailer, and every gust of wind felt like fingers tapping on the walls. At dawn, I pushed toward Broadus for fuel. By the time I reached town, my nerves were frayed raw. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, grief, exhaustion. But then, at the fuel station, an old-timer trucker walked past me, eyeing my rig like he recognized it. "Saw you coming out of the foothills," he said. "Rough night?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, rough enough." He nodded slowly, almost knowingly. "Storm like that. Folks see things." "What kind of things?" I asked. He shrugged. "You ever hear about the stranded man on 212? The one truckers keep seeing after blizzards? The skin on the back of my neck prickled?" "What?" He leaned in a little. Back in 1999, a driver wiped out on an icy curve. Truck rolled into a ravine. Took days to find him. They said he froze before help could get there. And every few winters since, Someone out there hears him calling. My stomach dropped. Calling on the CB? The old man nodded once. Channel 19. My blood went cold, but he wasn't done. They say he doesn't know he's dead, just wants a ride out, and anyone who stops, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. I already knew. That night on 212 wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the same thing every trucker on this stretch whispered about, but never admitted to believing. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. Because 2 nights later, when I crossed the North Dakota border, my CB came alive again. And this time, the voice didn't warn me. It asked for something else, something much, much worse. The dispatcher's last words, "We can hear you, but you're not here," wouldn't stop echoing in my head as I tore down US 24, the CB speaker hissing like something was trying to breathe through it. Outside, the night had gone unnaturally still. No wind, no distant farm dogs, just the hum of my engine and that faint, rhythmic clicking behind the static. I kept thinking about the voice, pretending to be my sister. Jenna had been dead 10 years. I'd buried her myself. Whoever or whatever had spoken on Channel 19 had mimicked her tone so perfectly that my throat still felt tight with guilt for answering it. The lights along the roadside flickered again. The truck's dash lights pulsed in sync with them, as if something outside was tugging electricity through the truck's veins. Then came the whisper, left at the next mile marker. It was so soft I almost convinced myself it was wind. But it came from the CB low, distorted, layered like multiple voices speaking the same words. I should have kept driving. Any rational person would. But truckers aren't built for ignoring warnings, even the supernatural kind. So I slowed as the green reflective sign shimmered into view. Mile 192. The same marker mentioned in the 1978 Indiana State Police report about a trucker who vanished on US 24, Harold L. Brewer, who'd supposedly called for help over Channel 19 before disappearing at that exact mile. I remembered reading that detail years ago, thinking it was just a campfire story disguised as a report. Tonight, it was carved into reality. The whisper came again. He stopped here too. My skin crawled. I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel crackled under my tires, sounding too loud for the empty stretch around me. The truck idled rough, shaking like it wanted to stall. I kept waiting for headlights behind me, another driver to pass, some sign I wasn't the only living thing for miles. Nothing. Total isolation. The CB clicked twice, something I'd heard old-timers do instead of using their voice, a kind of "you there" signal. But the clicks were too slow, almost hesitant. Then a voice, deep and wrong, slid through. "You shouldn't have stopped, Mark." My heart lurched. Hearing my name wasn't the worst part. Hearing it in Harold Brewer's voice, the one from the archived recording I'd listened to online years ago, that was what made cold sweat run down my back. The tape had been grainy, but the tone was unmistakable. "Harold," I forced out. "If this is some kind of sick prank, they're drawn to voices." He cut in, the words bending unnaturally on the edges, like something was shaping them instead of speaking them. "Yours carries too much grief. They hear that." I slammed my hand over the transmit switch. "Who's they?" No reply, only the sound of something brushing softly against the outside of my trailer. A slow drag. One long scrape from back to front. I froze. The temperature inside the cab plummeted so fast the windshield fogged over. My breath curled into small clouds. I didn't want to look in the mirrors. But I did, and I wish I hadn't. A tall, dark shape stood beside the trailer, leaning against it like it needed support, its limbs too long, its outline shimmering like heat waves, except there was no heat. It tilted its head slowly, listening. Not looking, listening. And then it repeated in a distorted version of Jenna's voice. "Mark?" My throat closed. The thing wasn't mimicking, it was replaying something, like a recording it didn't fully understand. "Mark, please don't leave me," words my sister actually said during the wreck, before the metal folded in around her and the fire took everything else. I hadn't heard them out loud since that night. But the creature had them. It had her. Something inside me snapped. I shoved the truck into drive and floored it. Gravel shot backward as the truck lunged forward. In the mirror, the shape stretched, then blurred, then vanished into the dark as if it had never been there. But the CB wasn't done with me. The static turned into something like breathing. Then another voice, this one calm, tired, defeated. "You can't outrun what you bring with you. Not Jenna, not Harold, not me. Something else, something older." My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. The whispering built until multiple voices overlapped on Channel 19. Men, women, children, hundreds of them, layered like a crowd speaking through water. Some cried, some begged. Some just repeated the same sentence over and over, a low chant that made my stomach churn. "Mile 192, mile 192, mile 192. It was like the road itself was trying to pull me back. I forced myself to keep going. I didn't care if I blew the engine. I just needed distance. When I hit the outskirts of Fort Wayne, the CB snapped off. Dead silent. The lights returned to normal. The night regained its normal sounds. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I drove straight to the next open truck stop, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and sat there gripping the wheel until dawn. The next morning, while the sun burned away the last of the fog, I checked my trailer. No scratches, no dents, no footprints in the gravel, nothing. But when I opened the door to the cab, something small fluttered onto the ground. A cassette tape, one with a police evidence label half torn off. The remaining text read, "Brewer, H Channel 19, final call." I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped back into the cab, started the engine, and told myself I'd never take US 24 again. But that night, another trucker parked beside me. A kid, maybe mid-20s, knocked on my door. He looked pale, shaking slightly. "Hey man," he said, swallowing hard. "I was picking up chatter on my CB tonight, Channel 19. Thought maybe you'd heard it too." I didn't answer. He rubbed a hand over his face. "It kept saying your name." And then, from his still running rig behind him, the CB crackled. Loud, clear. A single voice came through my sister's. "Mark, why'd you leave me?" I slammed my door and locked it. I didn't sleep. Because I knew the truth now. It wasn't just that stretch of road. It wasn't just mile 192. It wasn't Harold Brewer. It wasn't even the thing I'd seen outside my trailer. The voices were following me, and they weren't repeating the past. They were practicing for the future.